So I invite you to close your eyes, which is kind of a strange way to begin. Oh, but I'm also going to say one, well, yeah, we'll just begin there. And the reason why I want to begin by closing our eyes is to give our storyteller selves a bit of a rest, a break. And so as storytellers, we're always seeing, we're looking, we're focusing on the world around us. We're seeing through the dimensions, through the layers. And so as we begin to drop in, I invite you to allow yourself a rest from that overstimulus and to bring all of your attention inward and to allow yourself to take in a nice deep breath. Maybe both your feet need to go on the ground. Maybe just noticing your body now. Is it leaning forward, back? With a second breath, as you make more space for yourself within yourself, does your body want to align slightly differently? Now, as you make space for yourself within yourself, perhaps your core begins to lift a little bit more. And as that happens, perhaps your shoulders want to go back a bit more. And as your chest comes forwards, perhaps even your neck, your chin comes up a bit more. And perhaps you've noticed that in your way, in making space for yourself in this day, that your alignment in your somatic, in your body, in your lived self from which your stories emerge has shifted just a little bit to make space for yourself and for this today. And so I invite you just to do a moment of real tending to your beingness right now and listening for what is calling you here. What is calling you here? And is that calling coming from inside of you? Is there a voice that needs to get out? Is there a story that needs to get out? Is there something inside of you that's banging at the cage that's saying, please release me, I need to get out? Or is there a calling from outside of you? Is something drawing you forward? Is something calling something out of you? Are there stories that are banging around asking to come through your beingness? Asking for you to be their voice? Or is there just another reason? Just allowing yourself to settle into that. I'm going to begin with a quote. This is one of my favorite quotes. We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. They tell us to love or to hate, to see or be seen. Often, too often, stories saddle us, ride us, whip us onward, tell us what to do, and we do it without questioning. The task of learning to be free, let me say that again. The task of learning to be free requires learning to hear them, to question them, to pause and hear silence, to name them, and then become a storyteller. That's Rebecca Solnit. One more quote. And this quote really, I've been telling this quote for quite some time, but today it also means a little bit something special to me because I'm shaping this class a little bit differently than I have been in the past with a slightly different focus. And it's all woven into exactly this quote. The business of stories is not enchantment, and the business of stories is not escape. Okay. The business of stories is not enchantment. The business of stories is not escape. The business of stories is waking up. Martin Shaw. And what I would speak to and what I would add to that particular quote is when we look at stories, when we become scholars of stories, learners, when we commit ourselves to understanding them, then one of the first things, if you know of Stephen Jenkinson, he has a school that I'm grateful to have attended called the Orphan Wisdom School. And he calls it Orphan Wisdom Audit, Forensic Audit, the Orphan Wisdom Forensic Audit. And the first thing that you do when you meet a story is you go to it and you say, from where do you come from? Who created you? What were their intentions? What was going on in the world at the time, and what was the purpose? And all of a sudden, you start to have some context, some meaning, and you get to know this being a little bit more. And so that quote, I would say, actually, that quote that I just read, that ended with the business of stories is waking up. This is told by a man who has studied, stories for quite some time. He is a scholar of myth. And I would say that he is someone that understands where story has come from, and they were used at one point for enchantment, and they were used for escape. They still are. But I would say that there's a new horizon and a new relationship that we as storytellers are coming into, and that is with stories as a way of emerging out of the consciousness from where we are, which is also asking for us as storytellers to also take a slightly different, maybe not so slightly different, but a very different role as storyteller. Oh, we get to see Anjali's baby. Okay, so I'm going to, if you didn't notice by now, I have you all, I get to see all of you, which I really like doing. It gives this beautiful collective experience and lets us make the most of this weird online world that we're in. So if you want that experience, go up to the top right of your Zoom window and you will see a little Rubik's Cube, and it will let you see everybody. Now, right now, I'm going to pin the video only because when people are moving around, I get really distracted. And so I'm going to do that so that I can kind of focus. But when I come in for questions, I'm going to open that world back up. And just because I have it on this, which may have controlled or changed the way that you're looking at things, you can still go back to that other way, and you can still have this collective experience. And as we hear things that we resonate with, it's really nice to be able to nod and be like, yeah, I hear that, or that resonates. And if you see something or you hear something and you're holding a piece of information, or if you've got genius or wisdom coming through you, please feel free to add it into the comments. I'd love for this to be as much of a collective conversation. Nobody owns the truth of story. The story lives through all of us. And I'm just sitting at your helm today. And I know that many of you sit at your own helms. So let us call on all of your genius today. So what are we going to accomplish together? Well then, I come to you committed to share the landscape of sacred storytelling. And so you can go do a Google search. You will find the 6 main points of how we at this time know how to make and break a story. What I'm going to do is really introduce to you some other concepts in terms of how do we meet storytelling as a sacred practice. What is the role of a sacred storyteller in our times? And just kind of meet you on that landscape. So it's a little bit different. We'll talk about what is a story, what is a sacred story, what is a storyteller in the times that we're living in that takes on this as a conscious act of a way of being in community, that being in relationship with the times that we're living in, and being in relationship to shaping the times for our ones coming behind us, the future generations. I'm going to go over some basic things that most people never talk about when they talk about story, is how to help your audience be prepared to actually listen, what and why. Well, who actually does the listening? Who's actually doing the telling? It's not what you think. And if we have time, I'm going to tell you a little story. And I get a sense that we probably might not get to a wisdom story recipe today, but if we do, then I'll get there. Okay, so just a brief background from where I come to you from. I was conceived in Africa. Okay, too far back. But it's true. My parents were wild and crazy, amazing people that were driving across the Sahara Desert in a VW van from which I came. I always told them in a very bad sense of direction, what if I really wanted to be in Africa? Okay, sorry, I'm already getting a little distracted. Okay, so what story do I really want to tell today? Apparently it's my own creation myth. A little part of my own creation myth is that I grew up on a farm in Vermont, and I really got to commune with the natural elements in a very natural way. hanging out in the back 40, really listening to the trees, listening to the rivers, listening to the mountains. They were, in complete truth, my first friends. And I fell in love with story and got to know story really as a saving grace, because I was living a very isolated existence. I was actually moving almost every year until my high school year. As any of you have moved or know, being the new kid in town is not an easy go at it. And stories rescued me from that entire scenario. When I couldn't handle what kids do to each other, I escaped into a book. So I understood that stories can truly save you. They can rescue you. They can protect you from the world around you. They can also give you more insight and information than perhaps people can. And that was something that they really gave me at a very young age. I understood the responsibility of storytelling when I was 18 years old, and my best friend, Sheila Morris, committed suicide. And in the depths of my grief, I only knew what to do, which is what I did at that time, which was write. When I wrote a play, and that play was produced by a professional theater company, and I got to see it on the stage, and I learned the responsibility that what we put out into the world will come back towards us. Ken Wilber actually talks a lot about that too. And so I wasn't prepared at that time for the amount of people that were also making sense of their own trauma and grief around suicide would then be at my doorstep, and I would be responsible to all those people. I understood the power and influence of storytelling when I worked on the Green Channel, which was Al Gore's television network. And we were right at the crux of trying to get the stories of climate change into the world. How do we deliver this news and information that tells people how urgent the moment is, but also motivates and mobilizes? I would say my big walk-away lesson from that are two things. One is people with good intentions don't always do the best thing that really serves people. And I think that's a long story. We could do a whole class on that, which we're not doing right now. But how the complications of understanding the distinction between news and information, which humans are actually not designed to metabolize. This is a fun fact. We actually cannot metabolize news and information because we are storytelling animals. There's a great book that goes underneath that title. And we metabolize through story. So facts and information need to be in story, which gives us meaning, because we are meaning-making animals. And so I really got to see firsthand what happened in that wake. I also got to see firsthand that what people need most, what people respond to most, are stories. And so I went into my own journey, and I now work almost entirely through myths and mythic stories. So that's the quick and dirty introduction of me. So how do stories open hearts? This is a question. I like to go back to the beginning. And Hawaiians believe that words are so powerful that they have enough energy in them that they can raise the energy or slow the energy of the planet into motion. That words are so powerful that they can actually quicken or slow the planet. And the Sicilians believe that words can poke holes in the universe. That words can poke holes in the universe. If any of us have gotten into an argument with a loved one that we could not escape before our emotions took over, we understand that truth. And all of the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, or chanted into existence. I'm going to repeat that again because it's kind of mind-blowing when you really take that in, that all of the ancients agree that the world was sung, spoken, or chanted into existence. And so when we look at some of it, we're like, where is our ancient wisdom on the planet that's telling us how to be in the world, that's telling us how to live at this time in the world? It begins right there. And if we wonder why we've got so many humans wandering around, what's my purpose? What's my place? Could it have roots in that we've forgotten our relationship to our language and to that place on the planet that we specifically hold? And then let's go into that bigger question, that bigger, wilder question. What is a story? What is a story? So I'm going to put you all back into the world where I can see you. Let's have a little conversation here. We're going to be efficient with our language, but this is something that we all know. What is a story? Who would like to pop in? There's no wrong answer. You can raise your hand. Perhaps I'll see you. What's the story? Florenza. Yes.
I feel that a story is a way of using words to retell a time previously, today, in this moment.
It's a story to retell a time. So you're talking about the history keeper. You're talking about that stories hold history in them, or her story, her stories in them. Okay, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? You don't want to just get stuck with my definition of story. Come on. Yes, Sarah. Hi, Sarah.
Hi. A story is a journey, both for the teller and the person being told to, listening.
Yeah. It's a journey. Thank you. Right. And you're talking about that relationship between the teller and the listener, you know, and that there's this thing that happens between us. And that thing that happens between us is kind of, when we do it in person, we can really feel it. And something, you know, even in the theater, we can also feel it. There's like, it kind of feels like magic, right? We start time traveling and we start experiencing different things, and there's this melding that happens, and we both go on it. And certain storytellers will have this experience of, they'll transmit an experience that goes through them. And I would say what you're speaking to, when a storyteller is going on the journey, sometimes they transmit the journey through them. So I'm going to give a little behind the scenes. What I think is that a lot of times in writing, we're taught to give a lot of description, right? Tell all the details. Be very, very specific with all the detailed description. And in storytelling, if you really watch masters, and I invite you to watch the masters, you're not going to see them telling you all the details, the color of the paint on the wall or anything like that. They do something else. They're transmitting the expression of understanding how they're living in that space. And you feel that through them. So it's the difference between writing and telling, is that there's a transmission that happens that's different in writing. Anyone else?
I think story is also a connection between the teller and all those who listen, in the same way that music is.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's a difference if I play a song just by myself, or tell it. I'm assuming it's the same with the story. If I just tell it to myself, it's not complete. It's not the same as when I play it for somebody or with somebody there listening, because they also have a part in it somehow.
Yes. I love this piece that you're speaking to. What's your name?
Rika.
Hi, Rika. That stories are actually created in the listening. That's where they're created. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. It's not in the telling, because if there's no one to catch your story, if there's no one to catch it, then there's no one to carry it. And it's like dead in the water. You know, if there's someone to catch it, it might live. It might live way beyond any of us. Right? We live on this wild planet where entropy rules. Every physical thing will fall apart. We understand that. It's just the nature of being. But stories kind of abide by different laws. We have stories that are way older than any building on the planet, any wall on the planet, that have been carried in mysterious ways to us still. So that yes, there's this connection that happens. I'm also going to speak to, there's this kind of thing that happens that in that connection that I'm going to tell you, we're going to go on a little image. Let's go on an image. Let us go into a forest. And in this beautiful forest, with these bright green trees all around us, there is this very large elephant walking through. Now, this elephant isn't like other elephants, for its feet are made of gold, and it leaves gold footprints behind it. How many of you were able to see that image? Okay. So the part of my brain that was creating that image, you know, that exact part in your brain also lit up. So our brains literally connected. And we actually co-created a reality together. I've never seen, I don't know of elephants that have gold feet that leave gold footprints, you know? So it's like we co-created a whole other reality that none of us had heard before. And it happened through listening. And it's this magical thing that storytellers, and I don't call the people that listen to stories audience, because that's a very passive act, right? You might as well be going over your grocery list while I'm blah, blah, blah. You know, I call people who are engaged in storytelling as a very active act. I call it participants. People that come to the storytelling events that I produce, I call them participants. So in that way, what I'm calling magical, Princeton is calling neurocoupling. And they've done lots of research about what happens in the space of storytelling, what happens in terms of our empathy, in terms of our compassion, in terms of our understanding, in terms of, you know, a million different things. The flip side of that is that, you know, while we get to woo, 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 get so excited when we hear a love story, we're like, oh, the serotonin is going on, the oxytocin, right? Storytellers actually, stories produce a lot of oxytocin. You know, tell me your story of falling in love, or let me watch your story of love and I will fall in love too. And this is great. You know, that's a really positive thing. But the flip side of that is when you watch a horror film, you know, your brain is easily confused. Your mind, your consciousness, not so easily confused. Your brain, very easily confused. And so when it sees violence, it triggers fight or flight, survival, you know, and it activates the reptilian brain, you know, and it's like you get freaked out and stressed out, your whole thing. So some of us a little bit more than others. I think some people actually can just watch horror films and just watch, and some of us are like, you know, more physically, somatically engaged. But that is one of the things that happens in listening to storytelling. Are you guys hearing the dogs in the background? No, a little bit. Okay, let me just close my door because it got very loud in my yard. All right, who else has something to say about what a story is? Anything else? Yes, Victoria.
Stories, I feel, can unlock hidden messages that are pertinent to your healing, that you didn't know were there. And when a story lands on your doorstep, then this happens, this magic happens. That's why they're sacred.
Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, you're getting into this other conversation that we'll be going into, is like, what is a sacred story and what distinguishes it? And this idea that, you know, used to be, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but, you know, stories are these magical teachers. And I call it magical, and I don't mean to overuse that word, so pardon me. But I think because they are so otherworldly that it's very easy to use that language around them. And it's something that we've lost relationship with, working with stories as allies, as the teachers themselves. And one of the amazing things about stories is that it used to be you'd go to an elder, you'd go to someone and you'd tell them about your relationship problems or the hard decisions that you're trying to make about how to treat your neighbor or how your neighbor's treating you. And they wouldn't tell you what to do or give you all this advice or give you a self-help book, you know. They'd give you a story. And in that story was the possibility for you to, two things. One is you could learn different things from that story at different times in your life, right? You can only hear as much in the story as where you are in your own consciousness. So as you grow and evolve, as Mark Twain's famous quote, you know, when I was 7 years old, my father was such an idiot. By the time I was 14, he was so, you know, amazing and brilliant. You know, or maybe he was when I was 14. When I was 14 years old, my father was an idiot. When I was 21, I was amazed by how smart he was. You know, same thing. It's like as we grow and evolve and our consciousness grows and evolves, we can hear more and more out of the exact same thing. But also understanding that these that there's something else that happens when we work with stories as teaching tools, rather than thinking that we are going to give that person an answer, you know. And I fall into this. If you want some advice, come on over to me, ask me for advice. I love to give advice, you know, but perhaps it's more generous of me to just listen and to give a story that speaks to that time, you know, because what happens with a person who then cultivates their own learning, their own listening and reminding or understanding of their own access to wisdom through a story, then all of a sudden they're having an experience of self-authority. And that's something that we've really, really kind of washed out of our society, you know, this idea of self-authority coming first. You know, so I think that's kind of the curse of our self-help movement, is that someone else has the answer, someone else had the answer, someone else, rather than, no, come to each other with story. You have the answer. Let me help you come to your own self-authority. And that's some of the magic in storytelling. Claudette is saying that stories are a way that we can come to know ourselves. Yes, I'm with you there. I use stories, and I didn't understand this. I kind of stumbled into this and then I learned it in the books. But there's this thing called a medicine story, you know, and maybe you're familiar with that term. And I think it means different things to different people. But I know that for me and my own process, I have some of the hardest times in my life where I cannot make sense, where I can't figure out how to do things differently. In the grief of how life is turning, I'll turn to a story and I'll say, show me the way. And I didn't realize that I could do that. But I have that is something, you know, and I go through the mythic realms, you know, and through the fictional realms, and allow the story to teach me what I need to see and what I need to know so that I can make it through. And so I think that it's a beautiful way to get to know ourselves, both through the non-fictional narrative of how do we tell our stories, and then the mythical claiming of our lives being bigger than what they appear, as another way of sharing our stories, is through that mythic realm. So what's a sacred story? If we're talking about and I guess there's one other thing that I'll just say about a story. And, you know, they say that every generation, you know, speaks to, you know, back in the 50s, we referred to the bodies as machines, right? Because that's what we understood. We refer to it as wherever we're latest in our technology. You know, now we refer to our bodies a lot like computers, right? And so I think one of the ways that really actually makes sense to me is something within the story is also an operating system. And that operating system is what helps guide us in terms of understanding our values, our belief systems. They're agreements, they're collective agreements that we're making when we say yes to a story. And also what we believe is possible. So in order for stories to really live and exist, there's also got to be this resonance. And there's got to be a buying into it, a belief system that we commonly agree to this story. Okay, let's see here. What is a sacred story? What's a sacred story? While you guys think about that, I'm going to read this comment. Barbara Brown says, I was given a story in a dream when I was 13. It has been a guide for my life. Sometimes vivid, sometimes only in the background. The charge in the story is to find civilization. And if I did not, only would my life be longer and better, but so would everyone else's. It takes about 20 minutes to tell the story, the dream story. Beautiful. Thank you for giving us a glimpse into it. Sacred story. Anyone want to take a stab at what a sacred story is? Angel, can we try to hear you? Can we try? You're off mute. Do you have something plugged into your phone? Do you have a mic plugged in? Is that the issue? No. Darn. Okay. Well, we wanted to hear your voice. Krista is saying politicians use stories to persuade and make difficult concepts simple to understand. They're good. They are. I'll talk about how I think stories are being used in that world. Is anyone else want to just take a hand at this? Okay. So I'm gonna talk to you about how I understand the distinction of what a sacred story is. Why I use that language. First of all, it's a complete setup. To call something sacred is to call something else not sacred, right? So please forgive my sins against language. I was taking a shortcut into the way of understanding what are we speaking to. And to me, and I think I'm just going to say, oh, wait, we've got a comment from two people. Claudette saying a sacred story is a story that transmits universal wisdom with the power to transform us and the world around us, right? So she's using language of transformation. Hosanna Marshall is saying sacred stories mirror universal experiences and offer the possibility of transformation. So there's a transformation theme that's coming through here. What I would add to this is I understand stories as being as living beings, that they have a life force all their own. So maybe think about this, the last time that you were at the dinner table and someone brings in a story. And if we're talking about politics, what is that story really about? Is that story about fear? Is that story about feeling like a victim? Is that story about being powerful or powerless? What is the energy that you brought into the room with the story that you told? And so I do think of stories as having a life force in them. And some of them really, I would pontificate that they are here in service of humans, of animals, of earth consciousness abound. And if they've got jobs to do, I feel like some of us feel it's pounding at the door. The stories must come through because these have jobs to do in our time, and they influence and affect our consciousness. I would also say that we have stories that are, I once heard this expression, that are being written by dark scribes. And that sounds so suspicious. How about we say that we have zombie stories among us? You know, and a zombie story to me is a story that is made without a consciousness, that is made without, that is not a life that supports life. And that's how I look at sacred stories. These are stories that have a life force that's here to support life. So do we have stories that are not here to support life? You know, I would look around any television network at the whole stream of television shows. How do you feel when you walk away from them? All that violence. How do you feel when you walk away from all that depression? What's happening? Are they there to bring you into a new kind of consciousness? Are you getting just stuck in this vibrational pattern where they're just reflecting how you feel? You know, I think that's a lot of what happens. Stories that they can be reflectors. Or are you in a zombie story that's really actually here on the take? And so a quick and easy example of a zombie story to me is Jaws. Jaws was written by Peter Bentley. It was picked up by Steven Spielberg. It was the very, very first movie that Steven Spielberg ever made, and his intention, let's go back to this because I feel like so much of our influence in the stories that we tell comes right back to what our intention is. His intention was to get famous, was to get known, was to get recognized so he could go on to make many more movies. So he picked a story that, you know, if it bleeds, it leads, right? We can go into a whole other separate conversation about why we're drawn to that, but we're not going to. But he was a smart man, and he understood what inherently attracted people. And he picked this topic, and they took it. It was a fun fact. It was the first film that ever was filmed out in the ocean. Oh, by the way, their big metal shark broke. They ran out of money. Oh my God, what do you do? They're smart filmmakers. They show you a piece of the Jaws. So now we are out of kind of any literal thinking about this thing, and we're now instantly taken into the symbolic realm. So we have the story that takes place in the ocean, right? Representative of our consciousness. Could it be more representative of our consciousness? We have an image now that represents our fear of the unknown and our fear of death. Very first story ever carried down into the world carries the fear of death, by the way. We go back to our oldest 4,000-year-old story. And now we've got a story that is singularly responsible, where we can point back to say that influenced enough people in their decision making, what they believed acceptable, and instilled a deep fear, where we were willing to kill off this keystone species in our ocean that we are intrinsically connected to.
You stopped. You're dead in the water.
Yep, I don't hear anything from Leah anymore either.
Sometimes her internet is slow, and so she'll come back on.
Nothing quite as exciting as disappearing in the middle of your own act. So The guys must not like me talking about Peter Bentley. But actually, the story about Peter Bentley is quite wonderful, because when Peter realized what he'd done, the impact and the unintentional influence of his story, he actually spent the rest of his life trying to undo that damage, and gave thousands and thousands of dollars to ocean heroes and to sustainability. So that's someone that's like, it's an example of a zombie story. This story comes through, we don't know from which consciousness it comes from. We don't understand its intention as a being, right? But we understood that it had a pretty intensely negative impact on our planet that could go for generations to come. But the person who brought to it didn't necessarily know what they were doing, didn't have that consciousness at the time, but then took full responsibility. You know, so my actually hats off to Peter Bentley. You know, and then what has Steven Spielberg done? He's gone on to write, you know, he's never actually spoken to the impact of that film, but he has spent a lot of time making films that are designed to heal major crises of our times. So, you know, the one thing that I really want to go over now is, so if we understand kind of what is a story, the different kinds of stories, now really tapping into what kind of storyteller are you? What kind of storyteller are you? I feel like there's, you know, for a wheel to go round, you know, there's all different spokes in the wheel, and each of us are a different spoke in the wheel, and we all play a different role. Some of us, you know, I want to talk a little bit about how storytellers used to be in the world. This is just a little bit, you know. What we understand is a lot of indigenous cultures, you know, that the storytellers, as someone mentioned, that they were the record keepers. They would actually travel from village to village, from town to town, and they would bring not only news of what was happening in other places and report back in wildly entertaining ways, but they were also the history. They were the record keepers. They were the people that the village depended upon to remember what they had learned from maybe 2 generations before. They carried this forward so that they could continue to act on and learn upon what was already in their collective remembering. And that was a storyteller's job to remember. They were also the carriers of the teaching stories, right? They were the teachers, but they were the teachers, and then I would say they were the storytellers were the teachers that were tending to the teachers, right? Because the stories have their own life, their own way of teaching. There's also from other cultures, you know, if we go to Europe, we've got the bard, you know, this infamous role in the court. You know, I think the bard is often romanticized as this great character, but let's kind of get down and dirty about the shadow of the bard. You know, the bard sung for a supper, you know, and told the king and repeated versions of the king back that would entertain him, you know, he basically told people what they wanted to hear. Our journalist storytellers, absolutely. So let's get back to like, where are we now? So what is our story? What's the role of storyteller in our time? And I feel like this is a great unfolding for all of us to be in the great inquiry around this. What is our role consciously of storytellers? If we go back to this ancient knowing that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence, what is our role as storytellers? And so what I would say is that the role that many of us are taking is we've stepped into that human godly relation of being in a realm of co-creation and creation, and we are creating a reality around us. Right? Look at our virtual reality, look at our artificial intelligence. We are literally in this new realm of, you know, especially with all of our new movies, right, and the new technologies, we are creating reality. And as we create these stories as journalists and we tell these stories about the future, we are also in the position of casting a spell. So when we say the oceans will be empty in 2050 or Armageddon is coming, see, humans are meant to bring in story, right? There's supposed to be that journey. So when we pretend or act like there is no journey, that it's already determined, then we also have done this really, really dangerous thing, which we've taken the role, the place for us, where we live in the story, out of the context. There's no place for me in that story when the ocean's empty in 2020. There's a place for me in the story if you tell me that based on current information, based on how we have been developing and very quickly with the technologies without our awareness of impact, that now we can see, and when we became aware of our impact and influence, especially with the plastics, that then we started to hundreds of thousands of organizations and individuals from around the world have risen to meet the moment and are coming up with radical, amazing solutions. Radical, what is that word? Etymology, connected to the roots, by the way. So that these people are raising and that they are creating solutions every day for us to turn around this projected shift that we're on, you know, and that change is among us and that we can be part of it. That's a story I can live in. So as journalists, I think this is probably the hardest time in the world to be a journalist, because, you know, and to be a storyteller, because it's not just facts and information that we need. We don't need just facts and information. We need context and meaning. Dan Rather, by the way, News and Guts, Amy Goodman, Democracy Now!, those are great journalists who do just that. They give you the information, but they're also very committed to context and meaning. So when we think about what kind of storyteller are you, you know, where are you in this great spoke of the wheel? Some of us are story tenders, you know, we're tending to the old ones. We're caring for those old myths, those old fairy tales, you know, and we're making sure that there's a place for them to live among us. There's not many of those people on the planet right now, but there are a couple tending to the ancients. There are story catchers. They're the midwives. You know, I would call myself a story catcher. You know, David Bowie had this great expression where he would just put up the antenna, beep, 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 you know, and it's like, some of us are like that, you know, it's like, you know, here, okay, you're coming through, okay, I hope I can create a big enough place to carry you, now what do you want to be, you know, and that's like tending to the stories that want to come through and serve the times that we're living in. So we're calling in and living with new stories. I think that you can, and then there's that story, what do we want to say, the healers, maybe there's story healers among us, where they're looking at these old stories and they're being like, you're still among us, but you're kind of had like a false start. You didn't quite grow up, you know? And so I think of stories, you know, just like a tree, this is like a sapling. We don't expect it to say a sapling its whole life. We expect it to be a tree, just like a child. We don't want it to be 5 its whole life. We want it to grow until it's an elder. You know, same thing with a story. How do our stories evolve? And so I think some people are looking at these old stories and examining them and wondering, what's the consciousness? Why do you live in here? And one of the things that I talk about in one of my classes is the ethics involved with changing an old story. So I really, you know, and in that greater question of what kind of storyteller are you? Even before that, because I think that we only get to know that from practice. It's from doing it and doing it and doing it and seeing the patterns that emerge. But that also then you start going to, what are you in service to? What are you in service to? This is the biggest question. Are you in service to unifying our collective? Are you in service to, you know, shining a light on that which is not working and telling the stories from those who can't be heard? Are you in service to love? You know, it's like social justice, you know, teaching, amplifying, you know, it's like there's so many different things that, and it's like allow your beingness to speak to you and say, what are you in service to? So I'm going to tell you a little story. Just a little one. Once upon a time, there was this amazing master teacher, and she taught a lot, but her main thing, the main thing that she really understood was love, was generosity, was kindness. And that's what she was here to teach about. And this master teacher, many have come to know her by the name of Earth. Now they say that if you wanted to really learn about community and sharing and interdependence and connection, well, then all you had to do was go to her forests and lay at the feet of her trees and let your hands fall into the roots and see how your roots were connected to her roots, and all would be revealed. And they say if you were in a moment of lacking perspective, then perhaps you might climb one of those trees and connect with one of the great peregrines that was flying above. And it might be so generous as to give you some sight and some vision over the horizon. And they say if you needed to touch the ecstatic essence of joy, of pleasure, of ecstasy, then dive as deep as you can into her oceans and be held as she swirls and twirls you with the currents of love and life. And they say that her humans, that the two-leggeds, that the people were the ones that were able to hear all of her voices, all of her languages, all of her various perspectives, and they were able to speak it out into the world, but not just into the world, into the universe itself. And she depended upon them to be her voice, to carry her message, to be her messengers. They also say that a great curse was cast upon earth, and her voice was silenced when those two-leggeds lost their memory and forgot how to listen. How that curse was cast is another story. And they say that 10 seconds went by, or was it 10 weeks, or was it 10 years, or was it 10 aeons? This much doesn't matter, but this much we know is true, that there came a moment in time when people started to remember. When they touched their hands to the earth, they felt the communion of the trees. And when they looked up into the skies, they felt respect for their winged feather friends. And when they dove into the ocean, they had that sense of returning to the mother's milk, to what it was to be held, to what it was to be known before you even knew yourself. And they say that those two-leggeds are breaking their way, finding the cracks out of that curse, finding their voices, and speaking the message of this planet again. And that's us. So, thank you. So a little story for you. And that story comes from, I know I went in for like, what's the mythos of what we're doing? What is this call for sacred storytelling? What are we doing? You know, why are we here? What is this great call coming out of us? You know, and so what I wanted to do is give you a taste. If you liked this experience, thank you, Barbara. If you like this experience of being in this online realm, you didn't get to get the full depth of a lot of interactivity, but a little bit. And if you like the experience of going into the deep wonderings of what is the storytelling, what is it to you, what is it to be responsible for the times that we're living in, and what role do you specifically want to take, then there's ways that we can keep playing. So one of them that's coming up, I'm going to give you a link right here, is I've got a class starting. It's a 4-week class. And this class is called Myth, Magic, and Medicine, and it's the core curriculum that I teach. It's coming up March 7th, I think we begin. And so it goes through the core curriculum that I teach in terms of bringing you into relationship with your stories, with your magic and medicine as a creator, as a co-creator, being in relationship to that wildly life force of creativity, and then also coming into relationship with your specific medicine. What is your style? What are the ways that story wants to come through you? What are the kinds of stories that want to come through you? So if you are wondering about that, that is there. Also, if you're wanting to know and just have like a 20-minute session with me in terms of saying, what's the right course for me? Because I also have a course that's starting up in April, which is a 3-month journey, and that's Speak the Spark. And that course is all about, I co-teach that with 3 other co-teachers. So we bring in a guest master teacher, and then I also bring you through my core curriculum. So it's like Myth, Magic, and Medicine is like the great introduction, and then you kind of get to go on the vacation. I've been thinking about the metaphors. I'm like, it's like Myth, Magic, and Medicine is the weekend journey, and then but you get the goods. But then Speak the Spark, you get to be in relationship with all these other guest teachers as well, and you also get to have a length of time. There's something about having a little bit of length of time for your stories to emerge. And so if you're wondering, like, what's the right course for me? Is it Myth, Magic, and Medicine? Is it Speak the Spark? I do info sessions. I've got a couple open tomorrow. So if you wanted to use that, you could sign up for those right now. Or if you want to stay a little bit late after this course ends in just a few moments, I'll also stay late and talk to people about that. And then there's something else that I do. And this is a mystic kind of storytelling. And this mystical form of storytelling, we all have our abilities. One of mine is that I see people's mythic realms. And I can go into that in great detail, but what I do is I work with people to see how their life is working out in the mythic realm. So coming into relationship with your archetypal structure, with different myths and metaphors and symbols that are alive in your world and that help give another window into understanding where you are. And so people sometimes do those as threshold moments. They do them they do them for birthdays. They do them for Valentine's Day. I do something called soul to soul love stories for couples. So that's the link to learn more about that. And I do a monthly soul story that's open to the public. And so you can learn more about that too. And that's a fun way to be in community with a group of people that want to work through the lens of story, to not just use it as a form of entertainment, but as a form of waking up and coming into a greater, grander story of understanding where we are and what we're doing right now. So I'm going to leave you with a quote, and then if anyone wants to stay on and ask questions or lollygag, we can do that. But here's the quotes I love to give you. Whatever the limitations of our life, we are still free to choose which reality, which version of reality or story about our world we value and want to serve. I'm going to read that again. Whatever the limitations of our life, we are still free to choose which version of reality, a story or story about our world we value and want to serve. We can choose to align with business as usual, the unraveling of living systems, or the creation of a life-sustaining society. Joanna Macy. And then, act as if you are people of consequence so I can treat you as such. And you matter. What must have happened to people who unconsciously agreed that the best presence in this world is to have no consequence at all? It's a velvet gauntlet, this idea of being of consequence. It doesn't clink when it hits the ground, but you can feel it. It would be proper to proceed that there is consequence to us being here. It's Stephen Jenkinson. So now is that moment when you could all, I'm going to take you all off mute, and we're going to get to say goodbye, farewell. And again, if you are curious about Myth, Magic, and Medicine, it is one of my favorite classes and it's coming up. And if you want to tune in and just figure out what's best for you, or if you want to do private work, and if you're in a place where you want some sacred storytelling priestessing, where you're ready to emerge in your own personal way that's right for you, I do a lot of work fine-tuning and creating a curriculum that's just right for you in the moment that you are in your own development and place. So now we get to say goodbye, farewell, have a good day. Wait, can I take you all off mute? Wait, oh my gosh. Now we take you off mute. Unmute.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Everyone. Bye.
Stories.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Pick up the phone.
Thank you.
And if there's
Thank
any
you.
questions, hello, Laura. Anyone have questions that they want to stay on and have answered? I see a hand go up. Question coming in. All right. Then I think that we can all.
I do. I don't know if you can hear me or not.
No.
Okay, this is Claudette.
Hi, Claudia.
Hi. Did you also have something on Saturn or working with Saturn and rewriting your story?
Yeah, hold on, Claudia. I'm just going to try to find you so I can put everyone else on mute so that we can get rid of the. I have to put everyone on mute and then I can you take yourself off of mute. Okay. I can just answer and then you can perhaps get yourself back off.
Okay.
Oh, there you are. Yay. So you asked about Saturn Speaks. I did a one-day class,
Okay.
which I do as a gift and an offering to my community. That's all about actually planning for the new year, and it takes a reflective process on
Yes.
where did you come from and where are you going.
Okay.
Yeah, and if
And
you
there was-
want the video of that, just email
Mhm.
info@leolam.com, and you can make a donation and receive the video if you like.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, and there was another thing that I think I saw that you offer, which was a once a month women's group.
I have it's not a women's group right now.
Okay.
It's here. I'm just answering someone's question. How do we find out more about your class? There's the link. Ta-da! I'll also send out an email of all these kinds of links. What was your question? Sorry.
Well, it's
the once a month. Yes.
Yeah,
So,
it was a once a month meeting. I thought it was a women's group, but maybe that was the old one.
yeah, no, this is not a women's group. This is, I mean, as you can see, I think we had maybe one man with us today. You know?
Mm-hmm.
So my classes tend to have a lot more women, but usually there's one or two wonderful men among us. And there I do this work called Soul Stories. So it is a mystical form of storytelling where I divine a story out of our collective consciousness in that moment.
Okay.
And one person is chosen to actually receive the story. And then as a group, we go through and we make sense of it. Then I have a performance intensive. This is a group that actually meets in person. And we meet several times a year, and that culminates in a final performance of a storytelling event. I'm going to start one of those up in LA sometime in the spring.
Okay. Okay, so the once a month thing, what is that called? The collective story?
Soul Stories.
It's on your website?
Yeah, I dropped a link up here, but I'll bring it back down. Here you go. Look for online soul stories when you go to this link. And I just put it in the chat. But you're on the phone, so you probably can't see the chat.
No, I'm here.
It's okay. Go to medicinestories.com. It's medicinestories.com. And you'll see online soul story circles.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think that's it.
Okay, nice to see your face. Anything else?
Hi, Leah.
Hello.
I have a question. Could you talk a little bit more about, I think you said it was priestess story work, it's individual, about how you can use, can you talk a little more about that?
So I do, I call it storytelling priestessing. It took me a while to come out with that language, to be honest. But it's more than coaching. It's not just story coaching. What I do is it's absolutely developed for each individual that comes to it. So I have people that are coming to me sometimes at the beginning when they are like, I really want to get my voice into the world and I don't know how. Or I have other people that are coming to me where they're actually doing the work and they're really wanting to develop a more deliberate way of bringing into, when I do performances, I do sacred storytelling ceremonies. So there's a whole way of doing story that's a little bit unusual than what you'd normally experience when you go to a storytelling event. And so I help people really come into alignment with what's their unique way of telling story and what's their unique way of transmitting and transmuting the teaching and the healing that wants to come through their stories. And then how do they create a space for their audience to receive that? So I do that. And then some people come to me just because they're working with a really big, rough story and they want to be a part of healing it or transmuting it through the in-depth way of working with story. And so those are kind of the three ways I've been working with people. And then some people come to me with their scripts, and I do a little bit of script and story work that way. But
in working together with the priestess storytelling, is it, a one-time session, or is it we meet several times over, or we make the whole thing up between?
Yeah.
Is it a set package, or is it sort of like we have a conversation and figure out what's needed?
Yeah. So it's generally a set package. It's usually I only take on a few people a year, and I do we work with a year at a time together. And then what we do is we look at it quarterly. So usually I say, okay, if you're coming in and you really want to experience a real big change, and that's what personally excites me, is people that are really ready to go from one place to another in their own development or coming out with their voice or with their story or with their work. And you need at least 4-month chunks for that. So what we do is we sign up for 4-month segments. And at the end of each 4 months, we say, do we need more time? And then we decide another 4 months. And what that does is that creates a really strong container for you to be able to be held in the journey of it. Because sometimes when we're going through these journeys, sometimes it feels really great and it's fun. And then sometimes we get stuck. We need to have that thing that holds us in our commitment to what we said yes to. So that's why I do it in those 4-month segments. And then sometimes when you just have like a little thing and you're like, I just need like 2 sessions, then, I'm happy to work with you on that too.
Thanks. Got it.
Sure.
So to get to connect with you on that, just send you an email or?
Yeah, info@Leah Lamb, or here I'm going to do this again. I'm going to give you I'll just give you the link in the chat box right now. And
okay.
You can sign up and then set up a 20-minute info session with me. And we can just dive into what you're looking for.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was a really great webinar Zoom session. Thank you so much.
Great.
Really, really, really great. Yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye. Goodbye. Anything else? Any other wonderings? All right. Have a lovely, lovely day. Oh, wait.
I was wondering, because I am on a tablet where I can't see the chat at the moment. I've not used Zoom much before. Could you put all those interesting sounding links in an email to us, please?
Yes, that will be coming later this afternoon. Yes.
Lovely. Thank you very much. It was wonderful and inspiring and insightful and touching and wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Pleasure to see all of you. Pleasure to hear your voices. Thanks for sticking around. And yes, there will be a recording and it will be mailed out later on today. Okay. Take good care.